guys, my name is Ksenia, welcome back. So today I wanted to talk about the books that I've read in December. The first book that I want to talk about has a very long title that I cannot pronounce. So, The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue. I did it. By Mackenzi. So this is a young adult historical novel. It's very fast-paced, it's very plot-driven, and it's very funny. I mentioned it as one of the funniest books I've read last year. So the book is set in the 18th century, and the language is very old-fashioned, but at the same time it's very crisp and funny. The book follows Monty, who is a British guy who is quite rich and privileged, and then there's his sister and his best friend, and they all go to tour around the continent for a year, and by the end of this tour they are all going their separate ways. The characters were really cool. So there's Monty, of course, who is very privileged, but he doesn't realize his privilege, and by the time the story develops you kind of learn that he has his other traumas and he has his burden to bear, so it's not all as sunny as he makes it sound. And there's his sister, who's a girl who wants to become a doctor in the 18th century, so it's, you know, she encounters lots of problems on her way, obviously. And then his best friend, who Monty is in love with, is Percy, and he's biracial, again, in the 18th century Europe. So lots of people that he encounters calls him African, and they think he's either servant or slave of Monty, so he suffers a lot as well, and it might not sound like a fun book, but trust me, it's fun. I was honestly expecting a guilty pleasure read, just something to read without flexing my brain muscles. Brain doesn't have muscles, I know that, just I'll go with it. Then I realized that the book actually has a bit more depth than I expected, so I really liked that, and so I got my hopes up a little bit, and in the end I think the book didn't go as in depth with those topics that I wanted, so I was a little bit disappointed, but I was only disappointed because I got my hopes up, and you know, just don't do it and you won't be disappointed. Overall, it's a great book. Like I said, it can be a guilty pleasure, but it's a guilty pleasure with depth, with really funny characters, and with lots of themes to think about afterwards. Yeah, I'd really recommend it for like a light reading. Then I wanted to talk a little bit about an audiobook that I was listening, and this is Lair of Dreams, and it's the second part of the Diviner series by Libba Bray. I already talked a little bit about this in my previous reviews, that first of all, the audiobook is amazing. I'm not gonna repeat myself, it's just, you just have to listen and try. The narrator, generally voice, she's a goddess of audiobooks, so that's all I'm gonna say today. To talk a little bit about plot, it's set in the 20s in New York, and it deals with people with some weird abilities. They're called diviners, and then there are lots of supernatural stuff happening. There are ghosts and more ghosts. In this part, the plot focuses on dream sickness. So people fall asleep and then they have weird dreams and then they die. And this is an epidemic. Things are bad. Wow, I'm so good at describing plots. I feel like it's a solid second book in the novel because it builds on what was already there in the first novel, and it adds a little bit more depth, a little bit more themes, and more characters. What I didn't like is drama. There was so much drama, and I understand that this is young adult. I understand that I'm not a young adult, and maybe it wasn't marketed for me, but come on. So much drama. It was insufferable at times. I want to focus on the positives. So, I have three favorite characters. If you have read the book, these are Maple Rose, Sam Lloyd, and Evie O'Neill. So Sam is looking for his mother, and I really loved all of those chapters with him thinking about her, remembering her, and there were flashbacks, and it was very heartfelt. And then Evie deals deals with not having any parental control. She's just trying to prove that she's worthy, that she's not a shallow girl, not just a loud, babbly, happy girl, that she's something more. And then there's Mabel, who's my favorite character ever. I love her so much. And Mabel deals a lot with low self-esteem, unrequited feelings, always being in the shadow, being small and silent. And to me that was very, very, very relatable. So yeah, I love her very much. And now I'm reading third book, listening to third book, and she's even better and even more relatable. I'm listening to her thoughts. This is exactly what I've been thinking when I was her age. It's bizarre. I love loving characters. I love when I can say that characters are my friends. And with these, well, at least those three characters, I really love them. So yeah, I would say the best thing about this series is the characters and how they interact and their relationship and stuff like that. But the second best thing is how the book never glorifies 1920s. How this period feels very real and very scary, because it was a very scary time. There's a lot about the eugenics movement, which I've recently listened to a book called Gene, which also talked about eugenics and about 1920s in America. The fact that this book deals with it, so amazing. I feel like people nowadays tend to, how do I say it? Because it happened so long ago, people tend to think that it's, something that's not relevant today. It was in the 40s, people were different. We need to remember that these things are still topical and that it's not just something that happened in the past. Also, there's a lot about immigration because most of the characters are immigrants, and especially in this book I feel like with the new main character, who's half Irish, half Chinese, there's a lot about immigration and a lot about how her parents came to this new country in search of a better life because they were desperate, not because they wanted to leave their country, and they couldn't come back to the country and they had to preserve their culture and their language to give it to their children, to the main character, and how this main character struggles with being, on one hand she's half Chinese, half Irish, and then she has to also fit in American society and be American and speak English language. Yeah, it's like this balance between preserving your roots but also trying to fit in. And I know that I'm like very, very far from this situation. I didn't leave my country because I didn't have any other choice and I can come back at any time, but still I feel like this resonated with me so well because I live in another country and I speak another language even now, and at the same time I try to identify myself as this culture or that culture, and I'm never sure. I'm kind of in between, and now there's Sweden all around me, and yeah, and I'm thinking about like having kids and preserving language and all of that stuff. It's just, yeah, it's a lot. So I know the situation is super different from like what the people had in those times, and some people still have now, but still very relatable. Hit me very hard, as you can see. Great book. Listen to it, read it, just great book. That was emotionally draining. And now I spit my tea. Okay, and speaking of immigration and hard times, the next book I read was Persepolis by, I should check her name. The next book I read was Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, and this book also deals with lots of similar topics of culture, immigration, leaving your country, a lot. So yeah, this is a graphic novel and also it's a memoir. So the book, or Marjane Satrapi, tells us the story of her childhood and her growing up, and she was born in Iran. She was a child in the 80s, and that's when Islamic Revolution happened, and their perfectly ordinary country became very religious and very strict, and no one did know what to do, and everything happened at once. It's a fascinating topic, very scary, I still can't believe that this happened in the 80s, so recently. This scary change and scary period of the country's life was kind of softened by the fact that it was told through a perspective of a child. So she was around 10, I think, when this happened, and you can see how she doesn't understand, and girls her age don't understand what's happening. And one day they come to school and suddenly they have to wear a veil, and you can see them playing with the veil and not really understanding it. I feel like it begins in a very subtle way, like you feel like you're not supposed to feel scared. And that's the thing that when things like that happen, you don't realize that you have to act or do something or even be scared until it's too late, until all of their neighbors are looking through the windows to see if they have parties, if they have alcohol, if they are, I don't know, doing stuff. So yeah, I really loved how the book showed this aspect of their life, and it showed how Marjane Satrapi had to leave Iran. She had to live in Austria all by herself, and she didn't know how to live, she didn't know who she was, and she was really struggling. It's very scary because you want to live in your country, you want to be whoever you were born as, and you can't because you are not safe in your country, you can't trust your country, you don't feel comfortable in your country, and when you go away you're not yourself because you don't speak your own language and stuff like that, and then when you're in your country you don't feel safe or happy there. It's very scary thing, and with all the descriptions of war, to me it was horrifying to read, and I can honestly recommend this book to everyone, but I can't say I enjoyed reading it because there was so much war and because it hit me so hard, and I really wanted to finish it as fast as I can. But also there is another angle of showing the life in Iran in those times that Marjane Satrapi wanted to show, that Iranian people aren't how the media presents them, and she wanted to show ordinary people, how sometimes they struggle to live there, sometimes they're happy to live there, and they're just living their lives. And I feel like she did such a great job just showing ordinary people trying to live in this country and trying to survive those changes that are happening. So yeah, like I said, I would definitely recommend, but I can't say I enjoyed the book. I was really happy when I finished it. The last book I wanted to talk about is The Wonder by Donoghue, and this was the last book I read this year, and it was really bad, so I'm really happy it stayed in 18. Okay, so the book follows a nurse, an English nurse who came to Ireland in the beginning of the 20th century. Her job is to watch over a girl who is said to not have eaten anything for 4 months. So everybody thinks she's a miracle, and because the country is so religious, they all connect it to religion, of course. And the nurse believes in science, she's not religious, and she just wants to prove that the girl is actually eating something, and that's not a miracle. So the book is around 300 pages, and for the first 200 pages nothing happens. And I don't mean nothing happens as in there is no plot, but like reflections of the characters, pondering of the world, philosophy, character development. No, there's none of that. There's just the same thing happening over and over again, and then suddenly, after 200 pages or 250 pages, stuff is happening, reveals, emotions, and it gets so good. But come on, it gets good only the last quarter of the book or something, so it was very disappointing. Another thing is the characters. All of them are very, very, very boring. So all the characters are very boring apart from the girl who, had stopped eating and who is the wonder. She was very good, very well drawn, and she has lots of inner depth. But the rest of the characters are super boring, and I don't even remember their names now. But the main character, she's a whole other section of boring. There's a little bit of hint of depth at the end of the book, so I will say the end of the book kind of saved her a little bit. The 3/4 section of the book is she's just boring and she doesn't do anything. And that's the thing, she's very, very stupid. Like, I would read some section of the book and I would clearly see that this character says this, but he actually means that. And it's so clear. It's not like I'm so smart. It's just, it's very clear. It's on the page. But the main character is like, I wonder what he means. And you can see that it was just done to prolong the mystery that was just not necessary. Yeah, and the final thing, the writing of this book. So if you Google Emma Donoghue, she has written a lot of books, and she has written Room, which is the book that I think everybody has read and the movie that everybody has seen. And I don't want to say that she's a horrible writer, because clearly she's a capable writer, because she's written so many books and she's so well praised. But I haven't read her other books, but this one, the writing was really, really, really bad. Lots of emotions were explained with basic, she felt that, he looked this, and nothing else. No subtlety, no hints, it was just on the page. She felt sad. He looked bored. The most hated thing in the book for me was rhetorical questions. I'm not lying, there is at least one rhetorical question on every page. So if there is, say, 350 pages, there's at least 350 rhetorical questions in this novel. It drove me so mad. I will admit that the theme of religious versus science was kind of interesting, and that even though the main character wasn't religious, there wasn't any hate towards religion and religious people. There was just some exploration of how blind faith can destroy people, can harm people. And this was done really well. I really liked it, but again, it only showed itself at the end of the book. Oh yeah, and another thing that I really liked is the ending. It was very satisfying, very nice, very beautiful, and I think that's it. So yeah, that was my December. It was okay. Yes, I think that's it. And let me know if you've read any of the books or anything. I don't know. Come talk to me. Happy New Year, and I guess I'll see you next time. I don't know how to finish my